The alarm came at Oro 347 station time. Jake Morrison rolled out of his bunk aboard the Liberty as red lights bathed the corridors. His crew was already moving to battle stations before the announcement echoed through the ship. All hands. All hands. This is not a drill. Enemy contact in the outer rim. All vessels prepare for immediate departure. 3 months of waiting had ended. The Devourer swarm had arrived. In the Coalition Command Center, Admiral Susan Blake watched the tactical displays with growing horror. The enemy hadn't come through normal space. They had torn holes in reality itself and poured through like a plague of living darkness. "How many?" she asked the sensor operator. "Impossible to count accurately, Admiral. Our computers estimate at least 50 million individual units in the first wave." Dr. Alan Roberts stared at the readings flooding his instruments. Each Devourer was the size of a cruiser, but they moved like living creatures, biomechanical horrors that defied easy classification, part machine, part organism, part something else entirely. "They're consuming everything," he reported, his voice barely steady. "Not just destroying it, actually eating it. The quantum foam that holds space together is being absorbed into their bodies." The first Coalition fleets moved to intercept. The Zephyrian crystal ships formed perfect battle lines, their energy weapons charging to full power. The Corvani dreadnoughts took position behind them, their synchronized fire control systems linking every gun into a single devastating weapon. For 17 minutes, it looked like the galaxy's finest would stop the invasion. Then the Devourers adapted. Blake watched the tactical display as the first wave of energy beams struck the enemy formation. Dozens of the creatures simply ceased to exist, their biomechanical bodies unable to withstand weapons that could melt asteroids. The Coalition forces cheered as more beams lanced out, carving burning channels through the swarm. "Sir," the communications officer called out, "the Zephyrians are reporting successful engagement. They're requesting permission to advance." "Granted. Tell them to press the attack while we have them on the run." But the creatures weren't running. They were learning. The second wave of Devourers returned with hardened carapaces that deflected energy weapons like mirrors. The beautiful crystal ships that had mocked humanity's rust buckets found their perfect weapons useless against enemies that had evolved past them in minutes. "Corvani fleet, engage with kinetic weapons," Blake ordered. The massive dreadnoughts opened fire with projectile cannons that could punch through moons. Solid metal shells the size of buildings slammed into the swarm at significant fractions of light speed. The impacts created miniature suns as kinetic energy converted to heat and radiation. More Devourers died, their adapted armor useless against brute force impacts. For 30 minutes, the kinetic bombardment held them back. Then the third wave arrived with armor that absorbed kinetic energy and converted it into biological mass. The creatures that had been designed to resist energy weapons now grew larger and stronger with every hit. "They're evolving in real time," Roberts reported, his instruments recording impossible data. "Each generation is learning from the previous one's destruction. They're adapting faster than we can develop new tactics." The Etherian fleet tried next. Their ships were works of art, beautiful beyond description, powered by zero-point energy and protected by shields that existed in 11 dimensions simultaneously. They represented the pinnacle of their civilization's achievement. They lasted 6 hours. The Devourers learned to phase through dimensional barriers. They learned to drain zero-point energy fields. They learned to turn the Etherians' own sophisticated weapons against them. By the end of the 6th hour, the most advanced fleet in known space was drifting wreckage. The Titan Collective's ships held the line for 2 days. Their armor was thicker than planetary crusts. Their weapons could crack continents. Their crews were trained from birth for warfare. The Devourers learned to eat metal. They learned to digest energy shields. They learned to reproduce using the raw materials of destroyed ships. When the last Titan dreadnought went silent, there were more enemies than when the battle had started. Morrison received the retreat order while his ship was still 3 systems away from the fighting. The human fleet had been held back, relegated to support duties by allies who considered them useless in real combat. All units, fall back to the core worlds. Blake's voice carried exhaustion and desperation. Implement Scorched Earth Protocol. Deny the enemy any resources they can consume. Lieutenant Ben Carter looked up from his communications console. Sir, the Coalition is ordering all human vessels to begin immediate evacuation procedures. They're saying we're the only ships they can spare for refugee transport. Lisa Parker's voice crackled through the comm system from the Defiance. Jake, are you seeing these casualty reports? 90% of the Coalition fleet is gone. 300 billion dead in the first week. Through the viewports of the Liberty, Morrison could see the other human ships in their formation. 37. Vessels that had been laughed at and dismissed now represented the largest intact fleet remaining in known space. Ships held together with determination and spite, crewed by humans who had learned to fight wars with whatever they could find. The pretty ships are gone, Danny Hayes said over the command frequency from the Retribution. All those perfect weapons and advanced shields didn't mean anything when the enemy could adapt faster than they could think. Morrison called up the tactical display showing the swarm's advance. Red markers indicated consumed systems. Yellow showed worlds under attack. The advancing wall of destruction was moving toward the core worlds at an unstoppable pace. Admiral Blake, he transmitted on the command frequency. Request permission to implement the human protocol. There was a long pause before Blake responded. Jake, the human protocol was classified as a war crime by 17 different species. Only if we lose, ma'am. Another pause. Then Blake's voice came through with steel determination. All human vessels, you are now operating under Classification Black protocols. Remove all external observers from your ships immediately. What happens next cannot be witnessed by our allies. Carter's face went pale as he realized what was being ordered. Sir, the Corvani military advisors on board are requesting an explanation for why they're being asked to leave. Morrison's smile was cold as space itself. Tell them it's for their own protection. Make sure they're comfortable on the command station. They're about to learn why humanity survived when prettier species would have given up. As the shuttles, carrying alien observers, departed, something changed in the human fleet. The ships that had looked like rust buckets began to transform. Panels that appeared to be corrosion and damage slid away, revealing pristine metal underneath. Weapon systems that had been dismissed as antique unfolded into configurations that hurt to look at. All ships, report status, Morrison ordered. Defiance, ready. Berserker protocol activated. Retribution ready. Gravity hammer online. Vengeance ready. Probability weapons armed. Nightmare ready. Reality anchors stable. One by one, the human captains reported their ship's true capabilities. Weapons that violated physics. Defenses that existed outside normal space-time. Power sources that drew energy from the collapse of parallel universes. The Coalition thinks we're museum pieces, Morrison said to his crew as the Liberty completed its own transformation. They think we kept these old ships running because we couldn't afford new ones. He looked out at the stars where the Devourer swarm was consuming everything in its path. Soon, they would learn the truth. The human ships weren't old because humanity was poor or backward. They were old because they had been designed to fight wars that other species couldn't imagine. They were old because they had been tested against enemies that existed beyond the edge of sanity. They were old because they had survived battles that would have driven other races to extinction. Sir, Carter reported, the swarm has consumed the Kepler system. They're heading directly for the core worlds. Coalition estimates show complete galactic consumption within 6 months. Morrison nodded. Signal the fleet. Target the swarm's main concentration. 300 million hostiles advancing through the Kepler Nebula. Blake's voice came through one final time before the battle began. Human fleet, you are authorized for unrestricted warfare. Show them why we kept the old ships running. Show them why humanity never throws anything away. The transformation was complete. What had appeared to be humanity's desperate last stand had revealed itself as the galaxy's most carefully hidden secret. For centuries, while other species built beautiful ships for civilized warfare, humans had built nightmares disguised as rust buckets. The Devourers were about to learn that some things were older and hungrier than they were. Some things had been killing impossible enemies since before their swarm was even born. The old fleet was ready to teach the universe a new definition of terror. Admiral Blake's face appeared on every human ship's main screen at exactly the same moment. Behind her, the Coalition Command Center buzzed with desperate activity as reports of lost worlds continued to pour in from across the galaxy. Attention, all human vessels. You are now operating under Classification Black protocols. All external observers must be removed from human ships immediately. What happens next cannot be witnessed by our allies. Jake Morrison nodded to his crew. The Corvani military advisors, who had been assigned to observe human operations, looked confused as armed Marines escorted them to the shuttle bay. Their crystalline faces showed bewilderment as they were politely but firmly removed from the Liberty. Make sure they're comfortable on the command station, Morrison told Lieutenant Carter. Give them front row seats to watch what happens next. As the alien observers departed across the human fleet, a transformation began that would reshape the galaxy's understanding of warfare forever. The rust-streaked hulls that had been mocked and dismissed started to change. On the Defiance, Lisa Parker entered a command code that had been passed down from captain to captain for over a century. Her fingers moved across controls that officially didn't exist, activating systems that had been hidden beneath layers of false metal and camouflaged circuitry. Computer, activate Berserker Protocol. Authorization Parker 77 Alpha. Berserker Protocol acknowledged. Warning. This system violates 43 interstellar warfare conventions and 17 laws of physics. Do you wish to proceed? Proceed. The ship's hull began to shift and flow like living metal. What the galaxy had seen as patchwork repairs revealed their true nature as modular weapon systems that could reconfigure themselves in seconds. The mismatched armor plates were actually camouflage-hiding weapons that drew power from the quantum foam underlying reality itself. Aboard the Liberty, Morrison watched his own ship undergo its metamorphosis. The rust-stained exterior was molecular, camouflage-hiding antimatter torpedo launchers capable of cracking planets. The jury-rigged-looking power systems were actually feeding energy to weapons that could reach through dimensions and strike targets that existed in parallel universes. Ben, signal the fleet. All ships report when transformation is complete. Danny Hayes stood on the bridge of the Retribution as his vessel revealed its true nature. The old ship had been built around a collapsed star, its core containing a gravitational singularity that could bend space and time. Other species had tried to harness such power and failed catastrophically, their ships and crews torn apart by forces they couldn't control. Humans had succeeded by accepting the cost. They built ships that were more weapon than vessel, crewed by people who lived with radiation levels that would kill most species in minutes. They survived because they were willing to become something other than human to protect what they loved. Crew, prepare for quantum core activation. Fair warning, this is going to hurt. The Retribution's hull split open like a flower, revealing the imprisoned star at its heart. Gravitational fields that could crush mountains rippled through space around the ship. Reality itself bent and twisted as forces that belonged at the center of black holes were unleashed in normal space. Dr. Roberts watched the sensor readings from his station aboard the command vessel. The instruments were recording energy signatures. That shouldn't exist. Weapon configurations that violated every known law of physics. Power outputs that exceeded the total energy production of most civilizations. These aren't ships, he whispered to himself. They're weapons platforms that happen to be shaped like ships. The UES Vengeance completed its transformation, revealing torpedo tubes that fired shells containing micro-black holes. Each projectile carried enough gravitational force to collapse a small moon, yet they could be targeted with precision that would allow them to thread the eye of a needle. Captain Amy Foster watched her instruments as the UES Nightmare activated its reality anchors. Her ship's specialty was quantity over quality. Where other vessels carried weapons that defied physics, the Nightmare carried weapons that simply ignored physics entirely. It could reach into parallel dimensions and borrow copies of itself from realities where battles had already been fought and won. "All systems green," Foster reported. "Probability cannon online. Quantum multiplication matrices stable." The UES Fury's main weapon was perhaps the most terrifying of all. It could fire through dimensions, striking targets that existed in completely different realities. Enemies could be destroyed in parallel universes, leaving them dead in this one without ever being directly attacked. "All ships report ready," Morrison announced. "Target, the Devourer Swarm's main cluster. 300 million hostiles advancing through the Kepler Nebula." The human fleet moved toward the battle zone, no longer hiding what they truly were. Ships that had been dismissed as museum pieces now revealed themselves as the most advanced weapons in known space. Technology that had been developed in secret laboratories, hidden in asteroid belts and rogue planets throughout human space. "Jake." Lisa Parker's voice came through the communication system. "The Coalition is monitoring our approach. They're asking what happened to our ships." Morrison looked at the tactical display showing the swarm's position. 300 million biomechanical horrors that had adapted to every weapon they had, encountered, evolved past every strategy the galaxy could devise. They had consumed civilizations, eaten entire star systems, and turned the galaxy's greatest military achievements into expanding clouds of debris. "Tell them they're about to learn why we keep the old ships running." Admiral Blake's voice crackled through the fleet-wide channel one final time before combat began. "Human fleet, you are authorized for unrestricted warfare. No rules of engagement. No limitations on weapon usage. No concern for collateral damage to empty space." The transformation was complete. 37 ships that had looked like desperate refugees now floated in formation like mechanical gods of war. Each vessel carried enough firepower to sterilize solar systems. Each crew was trained to operate weapons that could kill concepts and destroy ideas. Morrison studied the enemy formation through his tactical display. The Devourers moved in perfect coordination, their collective intelligence processing billions of calculations per second. They had adapted to energy weapons, kinetic projectiles, dimensional attacks, and quantum disruption fields. They were unstoppable, inevitable, the end of everything that lived and dreamed. "Ben, open a channel to the Coalition Command." "Channel open, sir." "Admiral Blake, this is Captain Morrison. The human fleet is beginning our attack run. Recommend. All Coalition forces maintain minimum safe distance of 1 light year. 1 light year?" Blake's voice showed confusion. "Jake, that's beyond sensor range. We won't be able to monitor the battle." "Ma'am, you don't want to monitor this battle. Trust me on that." Morrison closed the channel and turned to his crew. They had trained for this moment their entire lives. Every human in the fleet had grown up knowing that someday they would face an enemy that couldn't be reasoned with, couldn't be negotiated with, and couldn't be allowed to exist. All stations, prepare for combat. Remember, we're not just fighting for humanity today. We're fighting for every species that ever looked at the stars and wondered what was out there. The Liberty's main weapon powered up with a sound like reality tearing. Around the ship, space itself began to ripple as forces that belonged at the beginning of the universe were channeled into weapons designed by a species that refused to accept the word impossible. "Targeting solution acquired," reported the weapons officer. "Pandora torpedo armed and ready." Morrison looked out at the swarm one last time. They had laughed at humanity's old fleet, dismissed them as primitive scavengers playing with antiques. Soon they would learn that some antiques were ancient for a reason. They were about to discover why humanity had survived when prettier species would have given up. They were about to learn what happened when you forced people who had turned survival into an art form to fight one more battle: fire. Dr. Maya Chen sat in the small medical bay that Jake's team had built in the deepest part of their underground base. Her hands shook as she held the brain chip they had removed from her head 3 days ago. The device was smaller than a coin, but it had controlled her thoughts for 15 years. "Tell us again what you saw in the research facility," Jake said. He sat across from her, patient but urgent. They needed to understand what the Caltharians were really doing. Maya took a deep breath. "The neural harvesting isn't for control. It's for defense. They've been copying human thought patterns, studying how our minds work when we're afraid, angry, or desperate." Lisa looked up from her computer. "Defense against what?" "Something called the Devourers," Maya said. The word felt wrong in her mouth, like it didn't belong in any human language. "I saw the files before they caught me. Jake, the Caltharians aren't our conquerors. They're refugees." Carlos laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "Refugees? They invaded our planet and put chips in our heads?" "Because they needed to study us," Maya replied. "The Devourers are coming. They've been destroying worlds for millions of years. The Caltharians barely escaped when their home system was consumed." Helen leaned forward. "What makes these Devourers so dangerous?" Maya closed her eyes, remembering what she had seen in the classified files. "They don't just kill people, they eat consciousness itself. When they attack a world, they turn everyone into empty shells. No thoughts, no feelings, no soul. Just walking bodies that serve them. And the Caltharians think we can fight these things?" Jake asked. "Not fight, resist." Maya opened her eyes. "Humans have something the other species don't. Our thoughts are chaotic, unpredictable. The Devourers can't consume what they can't understand." Before anyone could respond, they heard running footsteps in the tunnel outside. A moment later, Steve Parker burst through the door. He was a big man with gray hair and the bearing of someone who had spent his life in the military. Behind him came 3 other people that Jake didn't recognize. "We need to talk," Steve said. "All of us." Jake had heard of Steve Parker but never met him. The man was a legend among the resistance. He had been a colonel in the army when the Caltharians arrived, and he had never surrendered. For 200 years, his people had maintained military discipline in hidden bunkers deep underground. "You're the Morrison cell," Steve said, looking around the room. "We've been watching you." "Watching us for what?" Carlos asked, his hand moving toward his weapon. "To see if you were ready for the truth." Steve gestured to his companions. "This is Lieutenant Amy Foster, Sergeant Ben Clark, and Dr. Rachel Moore. We've been preparing for this day for 2 centuries. Dr. Moore stepped forward. She was younger than Maya, with blonde hair and tired eyes. "Dr. Chen, what you discovered about the Devourers is correct. We've known about them since the beginning." "You've known?" Helen asked. "And you never told anyone?" "Who would have believed us?" Steve replied. "The Caltharians made sure of that. They needed humanity angry and desperate, not terrified and hopeless." Lisa's computer beeped. She looked at the screen and her face went pale. "Jake, we're getting reports from the outer system. Long-range sensors are picking up something big heading our way." Jake felt his stomach drop. "How big?" "Hundreds of ships, maybe thousands. They're still 3 months out, but Jake, they're not using any technology we recognize." Maya stood up, quickly. "It's them. The Devourers found us." Steve nodded grimly. "The Caltharians have been preparing Earth's defenses, but they won't be enough. They never are." "Then why haven't they told us?" Jake demanded. "Why keep us in the dark?" "Because they're not sure we'll help them," Dr. Moore said. "Think about it. Would you work with people who enslaved your species, even to save your world?" Carlos spat on the floor. "Never." "That's what they're afraid of," Steve said. "Human pride and stubbornness. The same traits that might make us immune to the Devourers. Could also doom us all." Helen was studying the data on Lisa's screen. What exactly do the Devourers do when they attack? They send scout ships first, Dr. Moore explained. These ships release a psychic field that begins converting the population. People stop thinking for themselves and start serving the Devourer collective consciousness. Sounds familiar, Lisa said bitterly. The brain chips protect against it, Maya said. That's why the Caltharians put them in everyone. But they're not perfect. The chips work by suppressing human creativity and emotion, the very things that make us resistant in the first place. Jake was trying to understand. So they had to choose between keeping us free and keeping us safe? And they chose safe, Steve said. But now we're all going to find out if that was the right choice. Amy Foster spoke for the first time. She was tall and thin with dark hair and the kind of scars that came from fighting in tunnels. The Caltharian High Council wants to meet with resistance leaders. They're ready to tell us everything. It's a trap, Carlos said immediately. Maybe, Steve replied, but if Dr. Chen is right, the alternative is watching our entire species get consumed by something worse than the Calthararians ever were. Lisa's computer beeped again. This time the sound was different, more urgent. Jake, I'm getting a transmission from the surface. It's on Caltharian frequencies, but it's addressed to you specifically. To me? Jake asked. How do they even know? My name? They know all our names, Helen said quietly. They've been watching us as much as we've been watching them. Lisa put the transmission on the speakers. The voice that came out was strange, with the musical tones that marked Caltharian speech, but the words were in perfect English. Commander Morrison, I am Overseer Vexathalan of the Caltharian Defense Council. We know you have discovered the truth about our purpose here. We request a meeting to discuss humanity's role in the coming conflict. The room was silent for a moment. Then Carlos laughed. Commander Morrison, when did you get promoted? I didn't, Jake said. He was staring at the speaker as if it might explode. Why are they calling me Commander? Because that's how they see you, Steve said. Like it or not, you're one of the most effective resistance leaders on the planet. If they want human cooperation, they need people like you. Helen was already thinking ahead. What are the terms of this meeting? The Caltharian voice continued. You may bring 5 companions. The meeting will take place at the Denver Civic Center under a flag of truce. We will share all relevant intelligence about the approaching threat. And in return? Jake asked. In return, we ask that you consider joining the defense of Earth. Not as subjects, but as allies. Maya laughed, but there was no humor in it. Allies? After 200 years of slavery? Amy Foster looked around the room. My grandfather was in the Air Force when they arrived. He always said the Caltharians looked scared when they landed. Not like conquerors, like people running from something worse. Steve nodded. The question is, do we trust them enough to find out what they were running from? Jake looked at his team. Lisa was still pale from the sensor readings. Carlos was angry, but that was normal. Helen was thinking, weighing options like she used to do when she worked in government. Maya was holding the brain chip again, staring at the device that had stolen 15 years of her life. If we go to this meeting, Jake said, there's no going back. Win or lose, we'll know everything. And if we don't go? Lisa asked. Then in 3 months we might all be dead anyway, Helen replied. The transmission crackled again. Commander Morrison, we understand your hesitation, but consider this. The Devourers have consumed 47 worlds in this sector alone. Earth is their next target. We can fight them separately and lose, or together and have a chance. Jake made his decision. We go, but we go ready for anything. Steve smiled for the first time since arriving. Good, because Dr. Moore has something that might even the odds. Dr. Moore opened a metal case she had been carrying. Inside was a device that looked like a modified brain chip, but larger and more complex. We've been working on this for decades. It's designed to enhance natural human resistance to psychic influence instead of suppressing it. Does it work? Maya asked. We're about to find out, Dr. Moore replied. If the Caltharians are telling the truth about the Devourers, these might be the only thing standing between humanity and extinction. Jake looked around at the faces in the room. 3 days ago, he thought their biggest problem was getting people to remove their brain chips. Now he was learning that those chips might be the only thing keeping humanity alive. How long until the meeting? He asked. Tomorrow at noon, Amy Foster said. The Calthararians are broadcasting the invitation to all resistance cells. This isn't just about us anymore. Lisa was monitoring communications from around the world. Jake, I'm seeing responses from groups in Asia, Europe, South America. Everyone's talking about the same thing. Ships in the outer system coming this way. Then it's real, Helen said. Whatever's coming, it's big enough that the Caltharians are willing to risk everything on getting our help. Maya stood up and walked to the window that looked out into the tunnel. 200 years ago, they could have destroyed us completely. Instead, they enslaved us. Now I'm wondering if slavery was the kindest option they had. There's only one way to find out, Jake said. We go to the meeting. We listen to what they have to say. And then we decide if the people who... The galaxy was quiet in a way it had never been before. In the weeks following the Battle of Kepler Nebula, the silence stretched across countless star systems like a held breath. The Devourer swarm, which had consumed civilizations like a cosmic plague, had fled to the dark spaces between galaxies. Their few survivors carried memories of weapons that defied comprehension and ships that had rewritten the laws of physics with casual brutality. Admiral Susan Blake stood in the coalition command center, watching empty tactical displays that had once tracked millions of enemy contacts. The representatives of dozens of species sat in stunned silence around the great circular table, their various forms of anatomy all expressing the same emotion: shock. The Zephyrian delegate, Six Thon, spoke first. His crystalline voice no longer held the contempt that had colored his words months earlier. Instead, there was a trembling quality that came from something deeper than fear. Admiral Blake, we need to discuss what our sensors recorded during the battle. Elena Rodriguez, who had endured months of condescension and dismissal from these same beings, stood beside the Admiral. Her diplomatic smile was different now, carrying an edge that made even hardened military commanders shift uncomfortably in their seats. What would you like to discuss, Delegate Sixthon? The tactical effectiveness of our old ships? The innovative engineering that our scientists developed while your people built museum pieces? General Thex of the Corvani military shifted uneasily on his 4 legs. Ambassador Rodriguez, those weapons we observed, they appear to violate not only the accepted rules of civilized warfare, but the fundamental principles of reality itself. Our physicists are having nervous breakdowns trying to understand what they recorded. Jake Morrison, still aboard the Liberty, as it made its way back toward human space, listened to the diplomatic discussions through quantum communication arrays. His ship was already reassuming its disguise, exotic weapon systems folding back into configurations that looked like desperate jury-rigged repairs and improvised solutions. The transformation was seamless. Where reality-bending weapons had been, moments before, there were now rust-stained hull patches and mismatched armor plating. The Liberty once again looked like a ship that should have been scrapped decades ago, held together by hope and stubbornness. Jake, Lisa Parker's voice came through on the private human command frequency. They're scared of us now. You know what that means for the future? Morrison nodded to himself as he looked out at the stars that seemed somehow different now, as if the universe itself had learned to be wary of humanity. It means the next time something threatens the galaxy, they won't be laughing at our ships. It means they'll come begging us to help instead of dismissing us as primitive scavengers. Throughout human space, similar conversations were taking place in hushed tones. Other species were quietly reviewing their intelligence assessments of Human technological capabilities. Trade agreements were being reconsidered with new understanding of what humanity was actually capable of producing. Military alliances were being evaluated by beings who now realized they had been allied with something far more dangerous than they had imagined. Dr. Alan Roberts was already analyzing the long-term diplomatic implications from his station aboard the command vessel. The data was clear. Every major civilization in the galaxy was reassessing their relationship with humanity. Some with fear, some with awe, all with a new respect that bordered on terror. Danny Hayes sat in his captain's chair aboard the Retribution, watching his crew perform maintenance on systems that officially didn't exist. The collapsed star at his ship's heart had been contained again, hidden behind false readings and sensor ghosts that made it appear to be nothing more than an old fusion reactor running on spare parts. "You know," he said to his first officer, Lieutenant Commander Kate Turner, "they never asked the right question during all those diplomatic meetings." "What question was that, sir?" Hayes looked out at the void where the battle had taken place. Even now, weeks later, space itself bore scars from weapons that had attacked the fabric of reality. "They wondered why we kept our old ships running when we could have built new ones. They never wondered why we needed weapons like these in the first place." The truth was something that humanity had never spoken aloud, not to their allies, not to their enemies, and rarely even to themselves. Earth's expansion into space hadn't been driven by exploration or trade or scientific curiosity. It had been driven by the discovery that the universe was full of things that wanted to kill everything that lived and thought and dreamed. For 3 centuries, while other species developed beautiful civilizations and elegant technologies, humanity had fought a secret war. They had battled threats that emerged from dark matter storms and quantum fluctuations. They had learned to build weapons that could kill abstract concepts, ships that could survive the heat death of stars, and soldiers who could win wars against enemies that existed outside the normal flow of time. The Devourer swarm had been the first major threat to emerge that other species could actually perceive. It would not be the last. Admiral Blake closed the diplomatic channel and activated a secure communication array that reached every human ship, every human colony, every human installation throughout known space. The encryption was quantum-locked and changed every nanosecond, making it impossible for other species to intercept or decode. "All stations, all vessels, all command authorities," she began, her voice carrying the weight of species-wide authority. "Classification black protocols remain in effect indefinitely. Our allies now know that we can fight. They don't need to know what we've been fighting all along." The message was understood immediately by every human who received it. The galaxy had seen humanity's weapons used against the Devourers, but they had only witnessed the tools designed for conventional warfare. The real weapons, the ones built to fight enemies that existed beyond the edge of sanity, would remain hidden. Captain Amy Foster aboard the Nightmare was already updating her ship's camouflage systems. The probability weapons and reality anchors were folding back into configurations that looked like improvised sensor arrays and jury-rigged communication equipment. To any external observer, her vessel was once again just another rust bucket held together by determination and spare parts. But now there were new orders in her sealed mission files. New threats had been detected in the spaces between realities. Things that had noticed the battle in Kepler Nebula and were investigating what had caused such disturbances in the quantum foam that held the universe together. Morrison received similar updates as the Liberty continued its journey back to Earth. The war against the Devourers was over, but humanity's real war continued in the shadows. There were enemies in the dark between dimensions that made the swarm look like a minor inconvenience. As the human fleet dispersed back to their home systems, the rest of the galaxy was left with troubling questions that would reshape interstellar politics for generations to come. If humanity had built weapons like these to fight the Devourer swarm, what had they originally been designed to combat? The Coalition scientists who had studied the sensor data from the battle were beginning to suspect the answer, and it kept them awake at night. The energy signatures they had recorded suggested weapons designed to fight things that existed in 11 dimensions simultaneously. The quantum distortions indicated defenses built to repel attacks from parallel universes. The gravitational anomalies pointed to enemies that could manipulate space-time itself. Elena Rodriguez returned to Earth carrying with her the knowledge that humanity's position in galactic politics had changed forever. They were no longer seen as scavengers and survivors playing with antique technology. They were recognized as something far more dangerous, a species that had learned to build weapons capable of killing gods. The stars offered no answers to the questions that now haunted the dreams of every sentient being in the galaxy. But in the deep spaces between them, in the quantum foam that held reality together, in the dark matter that comprised most of the universe's mass, things that had learned to fear humanity's old ships stirred uneasily and reconsidered their plans. For the galaxy, humanity's rust bucket fleet had wiped the stars clean of the Devourer threat, and the universe would never underestimate them again. But more importantly, the galaxy now understood that some species survived not because they were lucky, but because they had learned to become something that even nightmares feared to face. The old ships were going home, but their work was far from over. In the darkness between the stars, older and hungrier things than the Devourers were watching, and they had noticed that humanity was no longer hiding what it was capable of becoming. The battle began in the Kepler Nebula, where cosmic dust and gas created a backdrop of swirling colors against the darkness of space. 300 million Devourer units moved through the stellar nursery like a plague made manifest. Their biomechanical bodies absorbing everything they touched. They had consumed 17 civilizations. They had adapted to every weapon, evolved past every strategy, overcome every defense that the galaxy's greatest military minds could devise. Their collective intelligence processed tactical information faster than quantum computers, coordinating millions of individual units into a single unstoppable force. Then humanity's old fleet dropped out of hyperspace, and the universe learned what real monsters looked like. Jake Morrison's voice was calm as he gave the order that would be studied by military historians for centuries to come. Ben, target the swarm's central cluster. Fire Pandora. The torpedo that launched from the Liberty's hidden weapons bay contained something that violated the fundamental laws of physics. Inside a magnetic containment field smaller than a marble, human scientists had compressed the raw force of creation itself. Matter and antimatter danced in impossible harmony, held in check by gravitational fields that bent space-time into configurations that hurt to contemplate. When it detonated in the heart of the swarm, it didn't just destroy the creatures it touched. It unmade them, reaching backward through time to ensure they had never existed in the first place. A sphere of absolute nothingness expanded through the enemy formation, leaving behind a void that made instruments scream warnings about mathematical impossibilities. The Devourers tried to adapt. Their collective intelligence analyzed the attack, prepared countermeasures, evolved defenses based on patterns that had worked against every other threat they had encountered. The Defiance taught them that evolution was a two-way street. Lisa, Parker's ship, unleashed its primary weapon, a device that her grandmother had called the Darwin Engine. Instead of destroying the creatures, it accelerated their evolution beyond all control. Devourers that had taken millions of years to perfect their forms suddenly experienced evolutionary pressures that compressed geological time into seconds. They evolved past their ability to maintain coherent matter. They evolved past their ability to exist in normal space. They evolved past their ability to process sensory information. They evolved past their ability to remain alive. Thousands of the creatures simply stopped existing as their biology advanced, beyond the point where life was possible. Their collective intelligence screamed in frequencies that registered on instruments as pure agony. Retribution. Your turn, Morrison called out across the fleet communication system. Danny Hayes had been waiting for this moment his entire career. The Retribution's main weapon was called the Gravity Hammer, and it had been built by humans who understood that the universe was far stranger and more malleable than most species realized. The weapon reached out across space-time and grabbed hold of the swarm's gravitational signature. Then it pulled, not just through three-dimensional space, but through all 11 dimensions that quantum physics insisted must exist. The Devourers found themselves being compressed not into a smaller space, but into a smaller existence. Reality folded around them like origami made of mathematics and pain. Creatures that existed in normal space-time found themselves squeezed into dimensions that had no meaning for biological life. They experienced existence as a series of mathematical equations that had no solutions. When the effect ended, there was nothing left but a region of space where the laws of physics apologized for what they had been forced to do. Captain Amy Foster watched her targeting computer acquire locks on 17,000 enemy vessels simultaneously. The UES Nightmare's specialty was quantity over quality. Where other human vessels carried weapons that defied physics, the Nightmare carried weapons that simply ignored physics entirely. "Firing Solution Omega," she announced, her voice steady despite what she was about to unleash upon the universe. The Nightmare's weapon systems reached into parallel dimensions and borrowed copies of itself from realities where the battle had already been fought and won. For 30 seconds, there weren't just 37 human ships in the nebula. There were 37,000. Each one firing weapons that existed in quantum superposition until they struck their targets. The effect was beyond devastating. It was conceptually horrifying. The Devourers found themselves under attack from directions that didn't exist, using physics that made no sense, delivered by ships that were simultaneously real and imaginary. Their collective intelligence, which had adapted to every form of warfare in known space, encountered something it had never faced before. Weapons that attacked the very idea of existence. Ships that fired bullets made of crystallized impossibility. Crews that had learned to fight wars against enemies that lived outside the borders of reality. Dr. Roberts monitored the battle from the Coalition command station, his instruments recording data that would require new branches of mathematics to fully understand. The energy readings were off any scale ever devised. The weapon signatures violated so many laws of physics that the computer systems kept crashing rather than process the information. "The swarm is trying to retreat," he reported to Admiral Blake. "Their adaptation protocols are failing. They're experiencing cascade failures across their entire collective consciousness." Blake nodded grimly as she watched the tactical display. Red markers indicating Devourer positions were disappearing faster than the computers could track. "What are they experiencing, Doctor?" Roberts looked at his instruments with the expression of a man who had seen too much. "Fear, Admiral. For the first time in their existence, they're afraid." The battle raged for 6 hours, but it felt like an eternity compressed into moments. The UES Fury fired through dimensions, striking Devourers that existed in parallel realities, and leaving them dead in this one. The UES Salvation deployed a weapon that deleted matter from existence, creating holes in space that leaked energy from the universe next door. The UES Vengeance launched torpedoes containing micro-black holes that grew as they consumed the enemy, creating gravitational anomalies that would puzzle astrophysicists for generations. Each weapon strike was an atrocity against the natural order, a violation of everything that made the universe comprehensible. But they worked. The Devourer swarm, which had never encountered resistance it couldn't adapt to, found itself facing attacks that came from directions that didn't exist, using physics that made no sense. Delivered by ships that had been disguised as rust buckets, but were actually concentrated nightmares given physical form. Morrison watched the tactical display as enemy markers continued to disappear. The swarm's perfect coordination was breaking down as their collective intelligence struggled to process attacks that violated every assumption they had made about the nature of reality. "Jake," Lisa Parker's voice came through the communication system. "We're detecting massive quantum instabilities throughout the nebula. Whatever we're doing to them, it's affecting space-time itself." "Acceptable losses," Morrison replied coldly. "Continue firing until they're gone, or we are." The human ships pressed their attack with methodical precision. Each weapon strike was calculated to inflict maximum psychological damage on the collective consciousness. They weren't just destroying the Devourer's bodies. They were attacking their ability to understand what was happening to them. Captain Foster activated the Nightmare's final weapons system. "Probability cascade initiated. Retroactive victory protocol engaged." The weapon reached backward through time and made the battle's outcome inevitable. From the moment the first shot was fired, the Devourers had already lost. They just hadn't realized it yet. When the battle finally ended, the Kepler Nebula had been fundamentally altered at the quantum level. 300 million Devourers had been reduced to a few thousand scattered survivors that fled into the void between galaxies, their collective intelligence shattered by encounters with weapons that should not have been possible. The human fleet regrouped, their ships already beginning to hide their true nature again behind facades of rust and disrepair. Across the galaxy, the survivors of dozens of species had witnessed something through long-range sensors and quantum communication arrays that would haunt their dreams for generations. Humanity's old fleet had not just won a battle. They had rewritten the rules of warfare itself. They had shown the universe that some things were worse than extinction. They had taught the galaxy a new definition of terror, and it wore the face of species that refused to give up.